All right, welcome back, everybody. In this video, I want to talk about how we could take a basic bar plot that we create in ggplot2 and change some cosmetic features to it. In this case, change the colors of the bar might be one very reasonable thing that you might want to do to the kind of default bar plot, which is created in ggplot2. So in the previous video, we created the following bar plot. So we answered question 3, which said create a bar plot for the species variable in the penguin's data frame. And so we inputted the data penguins, we mapped X, the species variable to the X axis, and then the geome that we used was the bar geome bar. And the default color that's used is this dark gray color. And that looks kind of drab, maybe. So if you're giving a presentation and you want to spice things up, then you might want to use some color to make it look prettier. And so we can add some additional aesthetic to the plot, and we can change the fill color of the bars by using the fill aesthetic. And so if you're curious about all of the various colors, here's a link. This is going to take us out of Colab, but here's a nice kind of link to changing colors and fills. And you can see kind of there's a big color guide over here and the various ways that you can set colors. So I'll just kind of point that out, but not go through all of the colors. My personal color of choice is steel blue. I recommend you choose some other color since I would like to claim ownership on the color steel blue. So if I want to change the color of these bars to my personal favorite steel blue color, one way that I can do it is inside of the geome. So the only thing I've changed from this previous way that I created my bar plot is just by setting the fill color inside of the geome. I run this code. Everything looks exactly the same. The only difference is these bars changed from dark gray to this beautiful shade of steel blue. That really pops, I have to say. That looks great. We could also change the fill color inside of the mapping aesthetic. So for example, if I set the fill to a variable such as species, let's see what happens. This sets a different color for each bar. So what happens now is it mapped different species to the x-axis. That was one of our mapping aesthetics. And then it's going to also say for each bar, pick a different color for the bar based on the species that's plotted. So this just picked a different fill color for each of the different species. So this is another way that you could do it if that's how you wanted to do it. So in the first example, we set the fill inside of the geome bar, and this set the same fill color for every single bar. That's a reasonable way to do it. If you want even more color, then you could do it this way. This sets a different color for each of the different bars when we set the fill equal to the same variable as the variable we used on the x-axis. And notice when we set the fill inside of the mapping aesthetic, by default, we didn't even have to ask for a legend. By default, it just created a legend for us on the right side of the plot. That's super nice, right? That's awesome. We have a legend here. These were actually quite complicated, or at least these were not so easy to create in base R. We didn't have to do anything to add a legend in ggplot2. The downside in this case is like this. The legend tells us absolutely no additional information in this case because these species were already labeled in the bar chart. So if I want to turn off the legend, we can do that with a theme. So here the themes are kind of things we'll see additional themes as we work with ggplot2. So themes are kind of more of the cosmetic changes that we're going to make, like changes to the fonts or the grid lines or some of these other options. So in this case, the change that we want to make here is not so much to like an object inside of the plot, but just the legend. So this is going to be a theme change. And all I want to do is say, just take the legend away. So we're going to change the legend position. I could change it from the right to the left, for example. Um, and that moved it over there. I could change it to customize where I want to move it. But here, since the legend doesn't tell me any additional information, I'm just going to remove it from the plot altogether. So I'm just trying to illustrate how the intuition of working with ggplot2 works here. So this legend position, I can turn it on, I can turn it off, I can move it to the left, I can move it to the right. So these plots, we can customize them, and hopefully it gets, as you work more and more ggplot2, you build some intuition for how to tweak these plots and customize them for whatever your needs are. And one last thing to point out with how we changed the color. The first way we changed the color, we set the fill to be the same for all of the bars, and we set the fill, therefore, inside of the geom. This second method, we set the fill to be different for each bar, and we did that by setting the fill inside of the mapping aesthetic. And by default, when we did that inside of the mapping aesthetic or the aesthetic mapping, that created a legend by default. And so when a variable is mapped to an aesthetic, like we do over here inside of this aesthetic command, this is going to assign a unique value to each unique level of the variable. So this assigned a unique color to each level of the factor. And this is a process in general, which is known as scaling. And we'll dig deeper into scaling next week. But I just want to mention this here because it's interesting and it comes up in this example. And so when we do the scaling here, it automatically creates a legend for us when we do introduce that variable is mapped through an aesthetic. So I just want to say that when we pass that fill color through the geom, like we did when we set all of the bars to steel blue, this was not a scaling since this was not done inside the aesthetic. And there was no legend that was created since, right, the fill was the same for all bars. There was no need to create a legend. But when we did pass the fill color through the aesthetic mapping, the legend was just created by default. And if we want to turn it off, then we have to turn it off. So the default is to add a legend. If we want to remove a legend, then we have to go ahead and like actively remove the legend. Okay, so we'll stop here. In the next video, we'll kind of talk about how we can add titles to an axis and customize those features of the bar plot. Thanks, everyone.